And then just as a reminder, I created a really generic agenda since we like to meet every week and to try to keep it just relevant for the topics that we seem to be covering. So if you have any comments on it, I'm happy to make changes to it based on going forward, but it seems like it gets us to where we need to go each week. And then maybe I'll just say that—
simple agenda. Thank you, Jane.
I see your wonderful Greta is here today.
Yes.
I wonder if Greta is kindly willing to take notes again.
Yes, I can take notes. Also, I loved you cut out colleague and you just said you're wonderful, Greta. Yes, I can.
I describe her like that too.
Thank you, Greta.
Thanks, Greta.
Okay, good. Yeah.
My only comment on the agenda is that the webinar, the upcoming webinar, I think we're going to be talking about not in the content of it or in the planning for it, not just in the context of public engagement. Maybe that's what you meant. I'm nitpicking here, but we need to do some work on that.
Appreciate that. You want to dive into that? That's the next one. So webinars, but we can go specific to the TCI, the Cap and Invest ones that's coming up. Does someone want to start with an update?
Yeah, Jared, do you want to start? It sounds like.
Sure. Yeah, so after the last meeting, I had agreed to reach out to Marie-Claude Francoeur and Michael Pizzaferi from the Quebec office, and they are happy to participate. Unfortunately, Marie-Claude has a conflict. I believe she's going to be speaking at MIT next Friday, but Michael is available to join, and I shared our draft agenda with him, and he sent some times that I've shared with Megan for like this week or early next week to do kind of a prep call with the other panelists from Georgetown Climate Center and whichever of us end up participating. But I think that's great news that we have a really great representative from Quebec to speak about their climate action efforts, both broadly, but then specifically around the Western Climate Initiative Cap and Invest program and what that has enabled them to do in terms of their transportation initiatives. So yeah, that was great news to get.
So where do we stand on getting the word out, Joey? Or UVM's not here. What's her name?
No, but Peggy O'Neill Vivanco's, she's really committed. She's been following up and nudging us, to get her the information she needs so that they can start promoting. And what we had said to her is we're going to have this conversation with you all today, and we will confirm, the sort of the agenda for the event, and then send her. She had put together some sort of just draft language. And so our hope today was just to clarify that we have Michael Pizzaferi talking about WCI, James Bradbury from Georgetown talking about TCI, figure out, who from this team might like frame it up and facilitate, and how we want to essentially just round out the rest of the details so that we can promote it more publicly. And she's poised and ready to go, and we can get her that information tomorrow based on where we land today.
I think the question is, should Jared did such a good job of framing up where we are right now. I guess Julie was involved too, where the Climate Council is right now. To what extent do we need to rehash that ground again? Or can we, I mean, obviously Julie's, this isn't in her calendar, and we don't need that, I don't think. But I don't know, I want to hear from others, how we set it up. Do we expect the same folk? If we do, we don't have to rehash it, but I think it's prudent to just keep rehashing things because somebody will not have heard it before. You need to say things over and over again. Anyway, Jared. And
I agree with that last point, that I do think it's important that we do some context setting up front, that frames where we stand and why we're having the conversation, and maybe briefly references some of those previous webinars where we could probably put the links in the chats if people wanted to see the overall transportation conversation that kicked things off, or if they want to learn more about the performance standard approach. That said, I don't think that it needs to or necessarily should be me who sets that context this time. And I wonder if there's anybody else who'd be interested or willing, especially because I just think it's healthy and appropriate for us to have different folks presenting. And I think originally we thought that we invited two women to present on behalf of WCI and TCI, and they both deferred to male colleagues. And it would be nice to have a gender balance in the speakers and panelists. So I'm happy to step back. Also happy to provide any materials that I've used or developed in the past to anybody else who might want to play that context setting introductory role, whether that's Joey or Megan or Julie or Jane or whoever.
Yeah, I think that the messaging is the same. The slides should be the same. It's just somebody else can deliver it. I mean, you did such a great job. But no, I get that we need to share the wealth here, but the message should be the same.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I do feel like some context setting and reminder of why we're here, and overview of what we are trying to get to at the beginning of every one of these seems really pertinent, because while you might be boring some people, I think it'll be important every time to level set. So
taking Julie, do you have Julie's slides, Jane? You know, I think that whoever does it
Yeah.
should select from both presentations. Get the most.
It's a comprehensive presentation at this point, Jared and Julie's, which is really nice.
And I used a much shorter context setting piece ahead of the Clean Transportation Standard webinar, but so I think so we can adapt or pull from that as well, as might be helpful. Because
I mean, I'm happy to do it or defer to Megan, or, you know, if you wanted to get into the technical piece of it and or like sort of facilitate and frame it up a little bit and get into the technical piece through you, Megan. I'm open to whatever. One of the questions I have though, maybe before we even answer that, is we definitely want to do, or I think it would be important to do the breakouts again, but I'm open if do people have thoughts on how to, you know, engage attendees to get their feedback on the different strategies and what they'd like to see, like, and is it small breakouts, and is it like on TCIP and on WCI, or is it about both and like smaller? What do people think? Because I tie that to this conversation because I'm thinking about like how we want to facilitate both of these things, both the intro and the context setting, and then the going deeper with people. So I'm open
before
to.
we go to the breakouts, can I just ask one question? We talked about this briefly on our last call, but I think that it would be good up front, in addition to the context setting of like the Vermont Climate Council, where we stand, you know, the commitment we made around one or more primary transportation policy recommendations by November. That type of context, I think we all agree on. Then there was the feedback that we got after the last webinar, that before we dive into the specific programs and policies from other states, just like a high level overview of like, what do we mean by cap and invest? How do these programs work? Because there might be more specificity on TCI and WCI that's like another level digging down, and that could be the same person. So if it was you, Joey, or Megan doing both that council context setting, and then just like a very brief introduction to this kind of policy approach in the kind of cap and invest bucket, I think would also be helpful to specifically note. I think on the question of breakouts, it possibly depends on how many folks. I'm trying to remember. I think there was something like 50 or 60 who came to the Clean Transportation Standard related webinar. I kind of go back and forth. I feel like if it was much bigger than that, we probably would want to do breakouts. But I feel like if it's that size or a little bit smaller, it can be helpful to stay together and see the comments or questions being made or raised. And I also just think like, I just worry in a short meeting, like if we have an hour and a half for this total, just kind of the logistical back and forth about moving between breakout rooms. And we're already kind of limiting, I think we've tentatively asked them to plan for 20 minutes each, James and Michael. And I imagine that will like lead to follow-up questions because there's a lot to both of these policies. So I'd like to hear more from you, Joey, about why you think breakouts are important, but I could see if it was the same size or less that I could also see an argument for kind of doing questions as a full group and not trying to deal with the logistics of managing breakout groups and going between different virtual rooms.
I think we're going to have a big chunk of time for questions because these things are two big ones. The last one really frustrated me because it seemed like there were too many speakers
Yes.
in too short a time, and it was too much information to have a good conversation. And I can't remember if there were prompts, there were prompt questions or not. I don't think so. So you opened it up, and then it was just so much that it was hard to have a good directed conversation in a little bit of time. So I guess my point is we should be in a big group and really get into some questions and then questions about the presentations. Then if we have, more than I'd say 30, then you get into smaller groups with some prompts. What others? I'd be interested in hearing from some of the public too on this because Dale or Jennifer.
Well, one thought I'd offer, and then sure, happy to open it up, is I just want to find a way to, well, first of all, I'd really like to make sure that we work with our presenters to anticipate the questions that people are going to have and have them proactively answer them. Like, can Vermont participate in the Western Climate Initiative? Because that's an economy-wide, program. Can we just do transportation? So a few things along those lines. Mm-hmm. And I think and I'm happy to work with you guys on what I think some of those would be. And then in terms of if it is like 50 people, I fundamentally agree that we may not need breakouts. I'm open to different ideas. I would very much like to see if we could tee up a few questions that we would get as many people as possible to answer, like related to what different considerations might you want to make sure that we're thinking about if, Vermont did pursue a cap and invest program. Like, I mean, some high level things that would help get input from people on like policy design considerations and or comparisons between different policy and regulatory approaches. So I'm open to different approaches, but I think if we do keep it in a big group, then I'd want to make sure that we found a way to tease out input from people somehow. Dale, do you have a thought?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say that I think that you get a very different quality of input if you have breakout rooms or if you have, only those people who are comfortable speaking to an audience of 30, 40, 50 or more. And I think that it's useful if you have breakout rooms and people are saying the same thing in all those rooms and, and someone is taking notes and you get the same feedback from multiple people. Lots of times people will say, oh, Gina already said what I was going to say, so I won't bother speaking up in that big meeting. And so I think that if what you're looking for is to hear from people and get a sense of, general sentiment. You'll get that a lot better from breakout rooms. That's been my experience anyway.
Thanks, Dale. I think that's a great point. One other thing that I've noticed is that I think oftentimes when we have a full group, like want everybody in the same session, I do notice that there are some people who may be hesitant to kind of go on camera and speak, but there's pretty active use of the chat and kind of putting questions there. That's not to say anything different or in opposition to what you just said, Dale, because I think it's a great point, and that there could be a really helpful and more inviting, engaging role for breakouts. But I think one of the other questions we'll just want to ask is, like, from the logistics of the event, like, what is the role of also utilizing kind of chat or question function beyond the kind of on video conversation as well? Like, I've been to some virtual meetings that have done a really good job of, like, utilizing the poll function to just get a really quick sense of the room. I don't know if we could frame up some questions to get an initial, I don't know what that would look like necessarily, but might be worth considering.
And I guess, maybe what do we want people to walk away, or what do we want to get out of this webinar? And then what do we hope people get out of this webinar, which may help answer how we set it up. I'm not interested in it checking a box. I think we need to continue to like connect and educate and explore, provide venues to explore things, but it'd be helpful to maybe spend a little bit more time thinking about, well, what are our goals? How do we want to make sure that we clarify those goals when we have people join us on the 13th? And then what do we want them to walk away with? So I don't know if people have thoughts on that. I could spend a little more time thinking of it. And maybe what we could do is, knowing we want to have robust public input in some way, is sort of maybe option 1 and option 2 different approaches based on the numbers of people that we actually get. I don't know. Jane, do you have a thought?
Yeah. I guess sometimes I think that like an understanding or an expectation that people will walk away really knowing what a Cabinet Invest program is or a performance standard is an unfair expectation. I think that is I've been at it for a while and I'm still struggling with the differentiation between the two programs. I actually think that what you want people to walk away with is enough information that they feel like they can make a decision about whether or not they would support a policy like that. So some broad parameters around sort of what the benefits and potential disadvantages are of implicating a policy like that, and why we're putting those forward as examples to consider. So I feel like it's really a communication strategy about how or why this could be advantageous to Vermont, and where this task group, the council, others will be considering and looking closely at what the perceived negative impacts could be, and how we'll be working to mitigate those in decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So a sense of the pros and cons based on the knowledge and experience that's elsewhere. That's the best we can do at this point, because we haven't really looked at Vermont, but it's what these other places, well, TCI has done a ton of research, so getting some of that out, I think, is important. And then learning what these other entities have done and the pros and cons. So that's the goal, the educational piece. I mean, people will come into this with their own set of biases, and won't listen and will think of the worst things or the best things about it. That's the grim reality of these kinds of sessions. We can, at least we're on record of explaining the stuff to people. And I don't think we're going to be at a point where anyone's going to run out of there saying, let's do this, or this sucks, or, you know, it's going to be a long slog, as we know from TCI, to make this stuff happen, make something happen.
I mean, with TCI, that's one of the things that interests me about it, because I feel like it doesn't have to be a long slog because we've been slogging for over a decade.
It's a political and a
But that's a very different thing than like getting the
Yeah, it's
policy
a
design right.
right. It's a communications, and it'll be interesting to see what, well, Georgetown can convey all the work they've done and the research and those pros and cons. So
I mean, what I hope, and harkening back to the comment that I made earlier, just hoping, you know, to the degree that they are able, I think both of them probably will be, speaking to the things that we know, and we know we want any policy to address, and that really comes down to policy design. Is how does it work in the rural context? You know, how can you shape the policy to serve rural, you know, transportation in a rural region? How does it work from an equity design perspective? And TCI has done some of that, and like James Bradbury can speak to that, and then also potentially speak to how some states had started the process to go further. You know, how does it, you know, like what does that mean cost wise? Like, have them proactively address some of those things, because they have, you know, at least for WCI, it actually has been implemented. But I think it would be very helpful, because I mean, a lot of the questions that we know that will be, or interests of Vermonters, are going to be things that are really like down the nitty gritty of like how we would actually like finalize the program and policy design. So I think, so pros, cons, and key considerations, if we can ask them about those things, and I would highlight, you know, prattle off those 3 things that I just mentioned, and maybe people have, certainly there are others that we should probably ask them to proactively address, and then be potentially prepared to go deeper on.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that would be, I mean, maybe it's obvious because it's why we're having the webinar, and it's what we framed up about the kind of one of the common lead benefits of both performance standard and capping policies. But I think it's worth asking folks to speak to and reiterate is that it gives us a high degree of confidence of actually meeting the emissions reduction targets that are set by the program. I think the other thing that is related to what you just said, Joey, goes to the role of how the policies either have been or can be implemented equitably, which I think is both in terms of what they apply to and the public engagement process and in the opportunities for investment. So I think that's really aligned with what you were saying, Joey. I just wanted to say a little bit more about those 2 key points about kind of level of confidence and really opportunities for an equitable energy transition and transportation strategy.
So do you think, I mean, is there anything that we're saying here that, you know, if a couple of us maybe take a stab at like framing out an agenda and sharing that over email, is there anything else people want to put on the table before we potentially pivot off of this, answering the question of who's going to facilitate and or context set? And then we can.
I just want to add to Jared's list there, which I thought was really good, was economics issues at as micro level as possible for Vermont, to the extent they can. The cost at the pump, the jobs, benefits, all that that should really be a part of what we're asking them to present, to the extent that they are able to tell us.
I think James Bradbury will be able to, I mean, there's that crazy Excel chart that they've done, like 5
Right.
cents, initially rising to, bunch of that stuff. I think he'll be able to speak to. Although I don't think he's going to be able to speak to everything, which kind of I was about to suggesting if we could get somebody from TNC in here to sort of overview their rural transportation analysis. But I think that's a different webinar.
Yeah, it is.
So placeholder for, there's been a lot of work done and analysis done on, how to design different policy mechanisms or programs to work in the rural context. So, but that's a different webinar. I like your title. I would, yeah, I think that's a good title. You could potentially flip it. But I think that's
Yep.
good
Yeah.
job, communications czar.
Yeah, the first phrase, I don't know if that's necessary. Just say regional strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or put that afterwards. One or the other.
I like
wouldn't
flipping
leave
it.
it. I wouldn't leave with it.
I'd leave it in, but my inclination would, yeah, regional transportation strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, explore and cap and invest.
But
Yeah.
I think
But if-
transportation should be in there somewhere.
Yeah, regional transportation strategies is what I would suggest. Megan, what were you going to say?
I just trying to add something else in there about, like, I don't know, investing in our communities or something, but I think that'd be too wordy, like regional transportation strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and investing in our communities. That's a lot. I don't
Could
know.
be a subtitle.
Yeah,
Title and then
I feel like it's important to say that we're capping and we're putting resources back out into the community.
Yeah.
But yeah, something like that.
Mhm.
And sorry, since I have the floor, I have to shift over to a Reggie call. And so I'll defer to others from ANR. But I will be, as Jared and I talked about earlier, sending out an email to both Michael and James to figure out a time to meet with them prior to the webinar to chat. So I will get on that this afternoon or this evening, and we'll set something up.
That's great. And I'd love to work with one or both of you on, like, what are the things that I'm hoping that they can proactively address. We've talked about a lot of them.
Yep.
That'd be
Joey,
great.
it'd be great if you're able to join that call.
I
Yeah,
would hopefully do it if I can.
I'll copy you, Joey, and Gina, and anyone else who wants to participate in that pre-call. Just let me know, and I'll add to the group.
And Megan, do you want to contextualize? Do you want to, or do you want us to figure out and then volunteer you in your absence if we?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Okay.
No, I'm happy to be volunteered. Just let me know. Okay, thanks. I'll have a great evening.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.
Sorry, this might be overly nitpicky and nuanced, but I think I put a new title in the chat, and I think it should be reducing transportation emissions rather than regional transportation strategies, because I think WCI
Yeah.
is an
Okay.
economy-wide strategy, not a transportation strategy, but it does reduce transportation emissions.
Yeah.
So
I like nuance. I work for the Vermont Nuance Resources Council. Rock this title. Come on. I like it. Okay, let's put that forward. I think as that seems like a good title. Good job. Looks like you're hiring for a comms person, but why do you even need one, Jared? You got yourself. Okay. So in terms of context setting, I'm happy to do that. I think Megan would be great. She's like the technical person. Maybe we can why don't we?
do a shared one in some way.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
She's not here, so I'll only speak briefly to say that I know she's really burdened with rulemaking, so I would just ask her if she feels like she has capacity.
Okay. I thought that's what we just did.
I thought you just agreed to it.
Yeah.
You left.
But here's what-
She did agree.
I think so, but
I
I
didn't
think
hear
what we
it.
should do, you guys, and I'm happy to work on this and maybe I'd vet it through whoever is interested and I can share it with all you all. Like one way to approach it, like agenda version 1, agenda version 2, and it could have 2 different ways to do the breakouts. Because I take Dale's point too. But it may just be if we get 30 people, we approach it one way. If we get 70 people, we approach it a different way.
I think that makes sense. I think we're close enough now that we have enough information on a title, the speakers, that we can put out some material promoting the event. But in terms of like the final agenda design, I think we could wait until like next Monday to make that call. And that exactly as you just suggested, Joy, being able to compare 2 different options and maybe with a little bit more knowledge about how many people have registered. I mean, I know a lot of people will do it last minute anyway, but that sounds good to me.
Yeah. That would be great. Jane, so if we work on based on what Peggy had delivered, and I'm happy to work with you on it, Jared, we now have a title, work on the summary. It can be specific, but still a little vague. Certainly there will be room for public engagement and questions. Is that something, if we deliver it to you, we finalize it tomorrow, you can get to the council and encourage their attendance? Okay. And then I also think, and I'm happy to send it. It can come from me and or Gina, or it could come from you, Jane. Sending it to after the session breaks, ideally this Friday for the love, to legislators, to House and Senate transportation, and leadership, like Climate Solutions Caucus members
Yes.
and committees of jurisdiction. This is May 13th, so they'll be done. If they can't attend, they can watch if they're interested. I just think it would be important to make sure it's on their radar.
Because ultimately this is going to be only first a decision about what recommendation the council makes, but then very soon after about what the legislature decides to do. So
Yeah.
I very much agree.
Okay. And Greta, thank you so much for taking notes that we will follow up on to-dos.
And Peggy has the list of everyone who participated in the earlier one. So maybe that's a no-brainer, but everyone who participated in the early one should get a notice about this one.
Yeah. Mhm. Agreed. Okay. So we have a plan for the webinars. Do we want to pivot back to the agenda? And oh, Megan's gone for an update on advanced clean cars, advanced clean trucks. Does one of the state team?
I can give you a brief update. It's the focus of the council meeting on the 6th, or one of the foci of the council meeting on the 16th. Megan and Deirdre are working on a cover letter and a memo for the council that'll go out next Monday. The rule is finalized, so what we'll adopt is finalized. What will still be forthcoming for the council is sort of the technical complementary document that will be informed by the further research NESCOM's doing in this space. So there'll be some components that are missing when it goes to the council, but in general, the rule is ready to be filed, and it's waiting on some of these extra components that will accompany the rule when it gets filed in July. So furthering the conversation in this space will be a conversation once that happens after the council meeting around how we frame up the public engagement meetings around the rule making, which we have to do this summer as required by the GWSA. So it's progressing well. We're going to talk about it with the council. Although, just a reminder, there's not much for the council really to do, because we either do it or as is from California, or don't do it at all. So there's not much discussion about what's in the rule.
And is there really anything for the council to do because we've decided to do it, or? Yeah.
We're just obligated to talk about it with the council 45 days before.
Yeah.
Nothing for the council to do.
Is there any super helpful update? It's great news. It's a big deal. And is there anything based on, indications that you're all getting about anything that we should prepare for that might derail things in any way?
No.
Okay.
We had a lot. I think Joey knows that Megan and I went to DC last week, and we were with all these other states, including California, and everything seems to be on track. And so we talked a lot about AC2 and advanced clean trucks.
Great.
That's great. Yeehaw, I know it's a big boatload of work, so it's really great. Okay. Anything else that anyone wants to say about that? Anyone? Okay. Other public engagement. Do we want to say anything there, or do we want to turn to the technical analysis update?
I'll just say quickly,
Andrew.
for a reminder for the Clean Cities Coalition webinar that they're doing about the EV infrastructure in Vermont, and talking about the NEVI program and the funding available for that, and just the strategy around that. And that's May 18th at 1.
Yeah, I got that in my calendar. I'm interested in that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sending that around.
Mhm.
They're busy little bees over there at the Clean Cities Coalition. Bless them.
And I was
Okay.
going to share that when, as Joey, I think, got a preview of a little bit, but the 2 public forums that we had for the council on work planning,
Oh,
CBI was assimilating all the comments and of that engagement, and it's broken into buckets of themes, and transportation is a theme that we got feedback in for those 2 meetings. And so those are getting finalized this week, and we'll circulate that in the coming days to all of you. So you'll get some specific feedback on transportation in that space.
looking forward to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
That'd be
that's
really
what I
good.
was, I think that's why I was kind of pushing for those notes, if we, to the degree that they were available sooner. They don't need to be cleaned up for me. I just was thinking it could help inform how we set up this webinar on the 13th.
I haven't seen them yet. So I don't have them to share, but if I did, I would
David had them all. I was like, they're right there. Let's see them.
I know.
I bet I'm not going to try to judge, prejudge, but I have a feeling I know what's in there. Anyway, neither here. It'll be interesting to see. More transit.
Okay. The technical analysis update. Next steps is, I don't know if Andrea or Jane, anyone provide an update on that?
Colin?
Yeah, I mean, I can update you on Andrea and Megan and I's ongoing conversations. We do not have complete, and Andrea can speak to this component in more detail, guidance on what we can and cannot use with the IIJA funds yet. That's largely based on what those funds are intended to go towards and what the administration will want to choose to focus them in on with respect to directing them to specific return on investment of programs that AOT already has in place versus sector-wide analysis. And so framing that up for the benefit of that with the administration to see if there's appetite and leeway within the funds to do that. We clearly have no funding coming in from the Climate Alliance as of yet to help support analysis. I did, for the record, raise it as a need and put forward with the Climate Alliance last week when we met that their expectation that states should use IIJA funds to further analysis in this space is sort of unreasonable with how they're being pitched to states with respect to transportation programs versus like sector-wide analyses, and that there was still a need for the Climate Alliance to fundraise and give states money in this space.
Especially, right, given the timeline, right, Jane? I mean, that not only our internal timeline of needing to make policy recommendations by November, but also being the only state that has a 2025 emissions reduction legal requirement.
We're not the only state. There was.
Oh, I thought everyone else, their first deadline was 2030.
No, there are 2 other states that have 2025. They're escaping me right now, but that was highlighted.
But they're outside of New England, right? Because I think in New England we're the only, yeah, okay.
Megan and I did have a lot of really productive conversations. So I'll say last week with our counterparts in Maine and Massachusetts, not as much with New York. They're like on their own sphere. And Connecticut, though, about, what other states are doing in the transportation space. And, Maine in particular is doing nothing really with transportation, it feels like. And they were kind of candid about, just that the reality of like Governor Mills is not interested in TCIP at all, even if it comes back online, because of the framework of their state. But they were interested in having further conversations with us about other policy drivers and collaboration. And so I think that is of interest, and we'll keep trying to talk with them about transportation.
Even post-election,
And
Jen?
then, yeah, the candid conversation was like, no, not interested.
But what would she prefer instead?
No,
Nothing?
She just doesn't feel like a rural state driving it. She does not support TCIP. I'll just say that. No other options though that they're considering in detail. And the woman Jess Scott, who works there, she's sort of more like Sarah Kernan. She's my counterpart, but not as deep into like the emission stuff. Jess, who does more of the climate pollution components of their policy, wasn't available to talk to me in detail, but because she got COVID from day 1 to day 2 at the conference, so she bowed out. So I think that there's a space for further conversation in the coming weeks and months. And, the conversation that Megan and I are participating in on Friday with Georgetown is like the first of that, to reinvigorate the Northeast states to talk about it.
Were the DOTs at your
So-
meeting? Or were the DOTs at your meeting? Or was it just DEP people?
These are governor office climate people from the 24 states that have signed on to the Paris Climate
Governor
Agreement.
level, then, yeah, okay.
I am curious.
And then, go ahead, Jared.
Sorry, Jen, I just had a question because, one of the things that many of us who've been involved in clean heat standard have been experiencing is a lot of interest from peer states. Massachusetts is looking at it, a number of legislators and organizations in Maine looking at it. And so I wonder on the transportation side, even if there was hearing from, one or perhaps other states, a coolness, which, we saw very publicly with Massachusetts and Connecticut and Rhode Island in the fall, a coolness around TCI. I'm wondering if there was any talk about the kind of performance standard approach and kind of what has happened out west with whatever title we use, clean transportation standard, clean fuel standard, low carbon fuel standard. We don't need to go into that in depth right now, but I'm just wondering if that came up as a topic of conversation beyond or in addition or aside from, some of the cap and invest.
Just the appreciation that we've been talking about it, and that likely for it to be viable in Vermont, we would want to start having those conversations with other states as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, I just feel like this whole space there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a need to continue to push on a climate alliance to support this more broadly. There's a need to wait on direction on IIJA funds. And then just like this question of certainty around timing of a council recommendation versus having the time to actually do an analysis. So a lot of things that aren't aligning quite clearly yet in my mind. And no clear path for the technical analysis yet.
Okay.
I just believe that depending on, what the likely outcome in November, what the prognosticators say is going to happen is going to put the pressure right back on the states, because the feds are not going to come in and save our lives. And these states are going to have to act. And I think that's going to push some of this stuff forward. I mean, I don't want to see that happen at the federal level, but that's what seems like is happening at this point. We'll know more in the fall, obviously.
Okay. there is a high level of uncertainty in many ways, but thank you for that update. Andrea, I know you're digging into the IIJA and the guidelines. Do you think, when do you think you'll have a better sense of that?
Well, I think we definitely want to talk to Georgetown on Friday and see what they're talking about and what their interest is in doing any kind of technical analyses, because they did mention that in their invitation to that. So we'll see what comes of that. And I mean, there definitely is some urgency around understanding where we are at with our own programs now, so that we can start informing the next round of budgets, which is going to start sooner than we feel like it should. But I was just talking with Joe and Michelle earlier about how soon we need that. And it is, we need to get that in the next few months. And so that doesn't really matter where the funding comes from. That is something that we need to get some level of understanding of what we're doing now and how that relates to reductions. So
this is VTrans. When you say what we're doing now, what VTrans is?
What VTrans programs are getting us now, and
or what Vermont is doing collectively. Most of them are.
No, this is
No,
about
only
just
VTrans?
VTrans. Yeah, definitely what VTrans programs are getting. And I think, with that information to help inform what else needs to happen, I have no idea what we'll find out about the programs and the things that we have in place. I mean, I think a lot of what is in the climate action plan is already in place in some ways for transportation. So how we get those things moving more.
I mean, I think it's
that's going to be our
place.
strategy.
I think the question is, how you gonna scale it and how you gonna pay for it. And so to the degree,
well, a lot of it is understanding it, because right now we don't know how transit does or does not contribute increased transit use, for example. What level of service do you need? How many more buses do we need? How full do those buses need to be in order to not cause more pollution? I mean, there's just a ton of research which gets to the sustainable transportation plan. What are the effects of these programs, of VTrans's program, the pros and cons, and how do they need to grow? Everything, bike ped, all that stuff. We know those are good things to do for many reasons. We can't say though that that's going to be X amount of emissions by building X amount of bike paths next year. We
don't know that right now.
We don't know that stuff. And I think that's what they're going to try to get into, hopefully.
Yeah. So we're looking at reaching out to some people that we already have relationships with, consultants, and that can, a transportation economist with the climate background, because they do exist, and trying to nail down that information so we can start making our own decisions, and that will inform our carbon reduction strategies as well. So yeah, that's sort of on the fast track. The thing I don't know about is whether or not we will be using that money to look at the broader pictures, the broader policy things that have come up in the transportation memo. I think that's just going to take a little bit of analysis to lay out what else is happening and where else we can go, and how those policies have, like, what nexus they are to the transportation agency specifically, not necessarily the transportation sector, but the transportation agency, before we can answer that more directly.
I think this is just prime for robust interagency coordination with A&R and the Public Service Department. I mean, obviously, you guys need to squeeze together and figure out, how much money is available and what grants are available, and, through the agencies, what's available. And Colin's got his hands up, and so does Jane. So maybe you guys have some insights into that collaboration that's got to occur amongst the agencies on this, or anything else.
I'll go first. Is it related specifically?
Jane?
Yeah, Colin, did you want to go first?
Oh, sorry, I broke up a little bit there.
Oh,
I
sorry.
guess I was just hoping to get a little bit better understanding of exactly what, like, I heard a while ago about something that was in, I think it was the T-bill and then maybe the miscellaneous bill about trying to capture kind of like all of V-Trans's programs. And I was just curious if that is the kind of level that you're talking about for this analysis, or if it's going to be a more focused and a little bit, I don't know, say broader scale kind of analysis. Because yeah, I think you could certainly get very in depth if you're trying to track every dollar that you're spending on these programs in terms of, and all the assumptions that are going to go into that are frankly a little bit mind boggling. But yeah, I would be interested certainly in talking through any of that. And as the process goes on, I'd definitely be happy to coordinate.
Yeah, go ahead, Jane. I just maybe can respond to both of you.
Oh, well, no, you go ahead. You respond to Colin. Mine's a little different.
Okay, I mean, of course, I think our agencies are working together and will certainly be becoming more involved if we get down into the nitty gritty of the data. Because I think there's different scales and we have to determine what those are and how quantitative or qualitative we stay on any of those programs and projects. And it's just kind of a lot to be determined right now, but.
Totally appreciate that.
Mhm. My comment was more of a question to this group because we started to talk about this uncertainty in the technical analysis space. And while I still feel pretty confident that we'll get to a place of funding some analysis at some point, I guess it's a question of when and where you as a task group want to explore the implications of like a moving target at this point, timeline, and like a plan B if we don't have analysis in the fall. And maybe it's okay just to acknowledge that we're going to stay in this limbo for another month or something and then reevaluate. But it might be nice just to own it and like decide what to do with it.
I get my initial reaction is I have thought all along and agreed with everybody all along that there is a real value to Vermont specific policy analysis. But if we were not able to have that completed in time for our November timeframe of a recommendation, we have a lot of really valuable, relevant, helpful information that could inform what a recommendation should be in the absence of that, even if it's a provisional recommendation or a first recommendation. I mean, we have there's all of the TCI analysis that's been completed for the region and at specific state levels, if that becomes a possibility again. There is a lot of information about how the Western Climate Initiative works. There's a ton of information about how clean transportation standard policies work, the specific impacts, both in terms of savings, potential costs, key considerations, really depend on the specific elements of policy design. But to me, I feel like it would be ideal to have some more in-depth state-specific policy analysis. But if it's not ready, I don't think we have the luxury of punting again. I think we have enough information that can inform a council conversation to make a recommendation, even in its absence, even if that is a provisional recommendation, because we just can't keep going in circles or kicking the can if we want to have a high degree of confidence that we're going to meet our legal requirements. That's my feeling.
So Jared, are you saying that we would force the question with the council, then that would allow for the studies to occur?
No, I'm saying we should do everything we can, and I appreciate what Jane has done to kind of follow back up with the U.S. Climate Alliance and say, we hear what you're saying about the IIJA funds, but we're on a different time frame, and it would be really helpful to have this funding to be able to do this state-specific analysis on the timeline we need to do, that we've committed to make recommendations as a council and ahead of the next legislative session. So I think we should keep trying to move that analysis forward if we can. I'm just saying that if it doesn't happen, if the funds don't emerge, or we don't, I think we do need to still stick to our timeline of making a recommendation. We don't have all the information we'd want, but we never will. And we have a good amount of information that can inform that recommendation. I think the policy memo that we framed up lays a lot of those key considerations and pros and cons of different policies out. So to me, it feels like it would be beneficial, but it's not 100% necessary to have that supplemental analysis to be able to make a recommendation or a provisional recommendation on our one or more leading transportation strategies this November.
I know, Andrew, you have to go. I have to go momentarily as well. I generally share that sentiment, Jared, although maybe we don't have to answer it at this moment. As you said, Jane, I appreciate you flagging it. But one thing I do wonder about, maybe it's not helpful, but maybe it is that there are different, we laid it out in our memo, but it may be helpful to ask or invite folks to weigh in on, these are the pros and cons with different approaches, pro regional participation in TCIP, but con, if you're the region, the states in the region don't move. I mean, just like we could ask people, some people there's a big movement towards just direct carbon pricing. You could potentially do direct carbon. I'm just wondering if we could invite folks we can lay out some characteristics of the different policy and regulatory approaches, and then invite people to weigh in with their pros and cons that we should be considering.
I'm just going to channel Jim Sullivan, who talked a lot at the meeting we had last week, Joey. I don't think we can go forward unless we can tell Vermonters how this is going to affect them in their daily lives, how this is going to affect the price of gas, and what the benefits are at a very specific level.
I think we do have information to be able to share that.
I think we do as well.
As long as we do. As long as
I think we have
confident about
we can never know for 100% certainty until a program is established, but I think we have a lot of evidence from other states and prospective modeling that has been done to give us our best assessment that we can have before something actually goes into effect.
I think that's true, and we can never know with 100% certainty whether or not we have that level of analysis, because we don't, would we have envisioned what is happening in Ukraine right now and the impact that is having on Vermonters' lives? So I think we need to give people the information we have, and we have good information, and we're going to need to do more to answer that important question. I think the other piece that Jim Sullivan really hammered home is the fact that we've been talking about this, we've examined a lot, and it's really a political question. Ultimately, at the end of the day, was the message he was delivering.
Well, yeah, but you want facts. You want the best facts.
Well, of course we do. Yeah, of course we do. And I think this is where I'm looking forward to. I'm going to circle back to the webinar, and then unfortunately I have to leave, but I would like to wait for any public comment if folks do have it. I think the webinar is going to sort of lay out some of those facts. People have to go. Okay.
And I just want to remind you that Cross Sector's meeting on Thursday. I have a transportation update, and I would pose this question because ultimately it's not this task group that makes the recommendation to the council, it's Cross Sector.
Yeah.
And I'm not 100% confident that you'll have broad agreement yet on that group feeling like you could advance.
Good point.
Just worthy of conversation to talk about with them. So that you're
certainly
moving towards something.
A reminder during that meeting to really encourage people to attend the webinar that's coming up, and if they didn't watch either or both of the first two, to review those.
Is there an agenda for cross-sector, Jane, yet?
I put one together for TJ and Rich Cowart, but haven't gotten comments back yet.
Okay. Well, that certainly seems like there will be a venue and a way to raise this because it's a good point. Okay. I unfortunately have to go as well. Anything else I don't know. I'd like to hear any public comment. May I intercede and just ask if there is any? Okay. All right. Well, hearing none, I will work with you, Jared, on the webinar components, the write-up for Peggy, the two different agenda scenarios, and ideally can join the meeting with Michael Pizzafari and James Bradbury. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you. Have a good
Good to
afternoon.
see you.